I was a little Sicilian boy. My birth name was Vincenzo Carlos Comito. And when I was 10, my mother remarried to a Jewish fellow from New York. So we moved out to Farmington Hills in the White Flight. And I left that St. Alexander's Parish, and I went into the Birmingham Temple and changed my name from Vincenzo to Vince Paul, as you see today. I bring this up because it's probably my first introduction into other cultures and blending and augmenting and layering on top of, like, now I have a whole nother culture in which to draw from. Well, that kind of stuck around in my life, and the performing arts gave me the opportunity to travel. And I like traveling, and I like learning. And so I've been to 40 countries, all 50 states, and as a result, everywhere I went, I was picking up all of these different cultural things, you know, way to dress and really cool foods. And so it kind of all came together when I came home 7 years ago to Detroit. I looked at what is Detroit. And I don't think it occurred to me back then that this is probably the most diverse place you find in America. In fact, we have as much immigration as New York City has. The difference being is that New York is transient. People arrive, they figure out where they want to go. Detroit is a final destination. It's like we have 450,000 people of first and second generation Indian. They build their homes. They put their kids in school. They yell to their brother, come on over. This is the place you want to be. So as a result, the census just jumps off the page. So the music hall had specialized in diversity programming. And I don't think the term diversity programming came until kind of recently, but it doesn't mean it wasn't happening. So I put on everybody's desk a copy of our season brochure. If you flip right to the calendar of events, what you're going to see is all these different shows, this mixing bowl. I can't make heads or tails of this program. What's the deal here? That's the deal. The deal is it's a reflection of our community. The idea being is you don't need to travel to Mumbai to see a Bollywood show. You can actually go to the corner of Brush and Madison. Now, all of the programs that we do at the music hall, they have to have, first of all, they have to be terrific. They have to be just great from beginning to end. But that's only the starting point. We need the compelling other reason of why we're going to present it. And that compelling reason can be, I saw a Bollywood show, and I'd have basically a 101 working education on Indian culture. I think I'm going to go back to Birmingham, where I have a plumbing business, and try to expand my plumbing business, because now I have a working knowledge of Indian people, and there's 450,000 living in Farmington Hills. I hadn't thought of that. So if you look through the program, you'll see Polish programming and Jewish programming and urban programming, you name it. If you live here, you're going to see it reflected at the music hall on the corner of Brush and Madison, which is the city center. No matter how you triangulate Southeast Michigan, that would be the city center, the most common point for all of the different communities, both geographically and in terms of where you're living. So, to accomplish this type of diversity programming, we use this very important equation. Okay, not really. I think it's like dance squared minus choir pi. No, I'm kidding. But they actually do come up with these things, with these diversity indexes. And so for the performing arts, I won over. So anyway, the idea being is that diversity is becoming formalized, is becoming more and more acknowledged as a very, very important contribution to the community. We use the performing arts as a vehicle for change. So it's reflected through all of those shows. The idea being is that, yes, obviously, Hamtramck and Novi, all the Polish come down to see Mazowsza, and it's glorious. Now, it's true. In Wixom, they're going to say, well, what's a Mazowsza? Everybody knows that's the National Choir of Poland. So if you come and you see, you begin to cross over, and then people are seeing other shows. And so I was talking to Maud earlier, and she's like, oh, how's the crossover going? Great. Every show at the music hall is now diverse. You can look out into an Aiden Reichel from Israel show, and you will see the rainbow of Detroit right there. Now, that's not to say that we don't do education programs, because the education programs are a thing. You must have access to hearts and minds in education. This is a very important point. When you're living in this incredibly diverse community, you need to be culturally bilingual, because then you do not have access to hearts and minds. I don't care how great your education program is, if you don't speak the language, it's going to fall flat. So the staff and the educators at Music Hall must be fluent in urban setting, in a suburban setting, in an Indian setting, Polish setting, Jewish setting. You get the idea. German setting, right? All of these different communities and their kids, they speak a cultural language. So what we try to do is use the performing arts and match it with a big Broadway musical. Fela, 2011, 2012. What we do is we extract the social messages out of these shows, and then we send out a task force we call the High School Assembly Program, and we go into high schools where through dance, through interpretive dance, through narration, through multimedia, through music and a lot of music, we take these lessons to provide you with a platform, and then you come and see the actual Broadway show at the music hall, and you'll get so much more out of the show because you'll know what they're talking about. So for example, Fela, we tell you, okay, music. Well, here's a James Brown drum beat. Here's a Fela Kuti drum beat. Here's one from Tupac Shakur, and they're the exact same drum beat. Now that's important for us because here in Detroit, we've produced more performing artists of world renown than any community on the planet Earth in history. Google it, since the Medici family. So it's important that you understand sort of the evolution of music, because then you have a better grasp on how to evolve it further. So by showing you that musically, how it came to be, that's one lesson you can get out of Fela. At the same time, the social injustice, the economic inequality, all of the issues happening in Lagos, in Nigeria. There were a lot of audience members that, hold it, are they talking about Detroit or are they talking about Lagos? Because in essence, all of these problems stem from something, and the question is, what is that catalyst for all of the social injustice and the inequality? Well, Fela discusses it. Maybe Sandra Isidore does it best in this little scene from Fela, which will require audio.
Listening? You don't understand. I grew up ashamed of my color, wondering why I was born this way. I was lost. Lost in the wilderness of North America with no knowledge, no pride.
Why are you Americans so hung up on the color of your skin? Africans are black, and we don't go beating ourselves up about it.
Because in Africa, everyone's black.
So that's got nothing to do with it. You see the point? All right. So the following year, what we do is we take another Broadway musical, which is back on the scene. I actually did the original Carrie in 1987. It's back. What's Carrie about? At the end of the day, it's about bullying. Okay, so we look at bullying and we say, okay, what is bullying? Why is it happening? You need to understand it before you can answer why and how to work towards stopping this terrible thing. So again, we create a task force of musicians and dancers, and we go into the high schools, 22 high schools this year, and it travels with what we call the bully board, and it's got resources and helplines, and it tells a story. We made a case that bullying is actually racism junior. And you might even say that racism is genocide junior. It's the same primary motivators, and we use the performing arts to communicate this. So for example, here's Mike in probably Cass Tech High School.
Fingers and faces. We're here to open hearts and minds. We want to share a little bit of information with you, and we want to inspire you. Are y'all with me? Are y'all with me? There are 3 things we want you to know. Number 1, self-love comes from the inside out, not the outside in. That's why we call it broken mirrors, no vanity. Number 2, most bullies are just people passing on their pain to other people. And number 3, you can't have a bully without a bystander. And hopefully we'll make that point for y'all today. All right, Jasmine, let's roll through this presentation so we can take them on this journey.
And journey it was. I mean, we kicked off the show with an incredible song that Mike wrote called Broken Mirrors. We got them all stoked, and then we hit them with the news. Boom. You can hear a pin drop, right? We knew that this had impact. We knew that we were sharing information that they hadn't heard before. Maybe they had, but maybe the teachers up to that point didn't have access to their hearts and minds. Maybe they didn't speak the cultural language. Our plan for next year, Clybourne Park. Who's familiar with Clybourne Park? Good, great. It's uncanny. All right, it picks up where Raisin in the Sun left off, the Hansberry play from, I'm gonna say the 50s, the 60s. And here we go back to the same exact house where the black family moves into the white neighborhood. We go to that house 50 years later, and now that neighborhood's being gentrified, and the white family's moving back into that house, back into that neighborhood. And we have a discussion. Clybourne Park is located in Chicago. We have a few parks ourselves. It's uncanny because this is exactly what's happening here in Detroit. So this one is a play, a Broadway play, but we will once again create a high school assembly where we will be able to share data and personal stories and true stories and demographic shifts, integration that's happening, packaged in a performing arts product. Because we know we can get access to your brain, and then we can start putting stuff down the chute. But you've got to get access to the brain. You must speak cultural language. Diversity training is irreplaceable. It's indispensable because you cannot speak the cultural language, so therefore you have nothing to say. Okay? I'll wrap it up to talk about the Music Hall. The Music Hall, established in 1928, it has presented more performing artists of world renown than any theater we can find. We look around America. And I'm talking, the guy who had my job was Florence Ziegfeld in 1928, for example. So we're talking about all the legends from Cab Calloway to Fred Astaire and his sister, you know, all the way through today to, of course, Aretha Franklin's and Lionel Richie's. I mean, just the wild spectrum of artists that have performed here make these four walls kind of holy walls. So it's a nonprofit. It has 80 trustees representing all of Detroit. Try getting a consensus there, right? So we look at those four walls as Detroit. It's not okay to just do a great show and be done with it. There has to be another reason for it. It's more of a community, it looks and sounds exactly like a theater, but really it's more of a community center. There are 18 professional theaters in the city of Detroit, and each one has a niche. The Opera House does opera. The Orchestra Hall does orchestra. Fisher does Broadway. The Music Hall does diversity programming. 227 performances in the past 12 months. It has 3 venues. It has the Jazz Cafe, which holds 100 people, where we can really experiment. And we have had the greatest jazz legends in that room. Not because I can afford them, because they want to play it. They got to play the room. Yeah, it's that really cool room underneath that old theater in downtown Detroit. Once you get your artists on your side, they got to play the room. And we win as a community because we curated it that way. Main Hall, 1,731 seats. Feels intimate, but it has 1,731 seats. Don't be fooled. It's actually quite big. And up on the roof, here's a demographic. Young people. That's a perfectly valid demographic. We have a nightclub on the roof called the 350 Terrace that curates the young people, and they have to walk by all those cultural posters on their way into the nightclub. So we know that we're getting access to their hearts and minds by speaking their language too. Thank you very much. My time is up. You've been a great audience. I hope to see you at the Music Hall, corner of Brush and Madison.
Thank you, Vince. So a quick announcement before we go to our next speaker. There's good news and bad news. The bad news is that one of the puzzles was solved. The good news is that it was solved by some young folks who are participating in the Sphinx competition, so it doesn't count. So you can keep working on the puzzles, and the adult attendees still have a chance to win a prize, so keep plugging away. On to our next speaker. Increasing diversity in arts organizations is one question, but how do you increase diversity in the audiences those organizations serve? Our next speaker has been a leader in Detroit's regional cultural community since 1990 and has also led the creation of CultureSource, a professional association of nearly 120 arts and culture nonprofit organizations across 7 counties. Please welcome Maud Lyon.
I love the puzzles because what we're doing is trying to solve one big gigantic puzzle, and all of us have different pieces of it. One of the things in thinking about this for this talk, I looked at the Diversity and Inclusion Initiative of the Michigan Nonprofit Association and Nonprofit Enterprise at Work, and they have a construct that I think is really helpful. It looks at oppression on 4 different levels. The first is institutional and systemic. That's the kind of barriers that keep us from keep whole groups of people from having access to resources and having and opportunities for themselves. The next level is community and cultural. That's the kind of thing of where we choose to live, who we choose to socialize with, the kinds of habits we have that keep us apart. And the next level is interpersonal relationships, the way that we view one another and think about one another and interact with each other. And then finally, and perhaps the most damaging, the internal level, which is how you think about your own capacity, your own opportunities, where you fit in the world and how you expect other people to treat you. As we all know, and there have been great examples yesterday and more coming today, arts and culture is the best way to address many of these levels. If we're going to have societal change, if we're going to become a more inclusive and equitable society, then we have to have a way in. And arts and culture makes you look differently at things. It gives us ways to share common passions, to learn from each other, and to have the joy of just experience with all kinds of people. It also allows us to lift up important values. This is the Rosa Parks bus at the Henry Ford, part of their permanent exhibit. One of the ways to learn about a culture that's not your own is either food or music or dance. Performing arts are so approachable, and they give us an opportunity to really understand, like everything that Vince just talked about with Music Hall. When you're going to exhibitions of not only art, but also history and science, you learn about different ways of looking at the world. It makes you challenge your assumptions. It makes you suddenly go, oh, and think differently. And theater is one of the best ways to understand that we as human beings have more in common than we are different. The banner is from the Performance Network in Ann Arbor, and the picture in the jar is from an upcoming play at the Detroit Repertory Theater about a family struggling with autism. Public art is a way that we, again, lift up common values and tell people what's important in our history and important in our culture. This is part of the International Monument to the Underground Railroad that's just blocks from here on the Detroit River. And then you have wonderful groups. One of our member organizations is the Inside Out Literary Arts Project. And they are they put poets in residencies in Detroit public schools so that kids learn not only to be poets, but they learn that they have something to say and that people will listen to them. And then they do performances all around the city. And then finally, another great benefit of arts and culture I think we often miss is the very act of creating it creates community, and it can be inclusive. These are volunteers at Detroit Public Television, but we all produce events, produce exhibitions, have all kinds of ways in which we engage everyone from the board to the docents in helping to do what we do for the community. The best thing about arts and culture is that it inspires us and it allows us to have a sense of wonder at what people are able to do. But none of this is any good if people don't show up. And we do fantastic programming, and we heard yesterday from the Boston Children's Choir, from El Sistemo, the way that this really changes people's lives on an individual level. And Vince talked about how it changes people's lives by combining education with the people that the shows that come to Music Hall and the diverse audiences that interact with each other in the hall. But we need to kick it up a level. CultureSource is an arts service organization. We have 120 member organizations. We cover 7 counties of southeastern Michigan. And we started looking at what are the problems that we do wonderful things, but if there aren't enough people in the galleries and there aren't seats filled in the theater, then we're not doing our job and the community is not benefiting. So lack of awareness of arts and culture is our #1 problem. Only part of the public participates. There have been studies all over the country about this, and we tend to market to the same audience, and we get the same audience, and then there's a whole other audience that isn't connecting with what we do. A lot of people just think it's not for me, it's not something I do. I had a curator once who grew up in Indiana in a blue-collar city, and he said, you know, his family never went to museums. People today don't plan ahead. We are so busy, we have so many pressures on us, and information is so readily available that, you know, we just sort of go with the flow. We don't buy subscriptions, we don't plan way ahead. And what that means is that only a couple of organizations with high visibility in our area would be the Henry Ford, the Detroit Symphony Orchestra, the Detroit Zoo, and the Detroit Institute of Arts. Those are top of mind, but organizations like the Carr Center or Heritage Works or the Arab American National Museum are just off of many people's radar. So the marketing dilemma for organizations is that we have small budgets, we can't afford to advertise. Performing arts advertises a lot more than museums do. Arts education programs are another whole deal. The coverage, we used to depend on the free coverage from arts reporters and local papers. Well, with the changes in the media industry, not so much. We have small staffs, and our staff could barely keep up with marketing and PR before, and now there's all of the social media to do. And we have to remember that our audiences also have a marketing dilemma. They don't know what to look for. When you could look in your local paper, you could open the page and there was something you went, oh, that would be interesting. But now you go to the internet and you find what you're looking for. And if you're not sure why you'd be interested, and you don't have time to search, then you're not going to be there. So the solution that we've come up with here in southeastern Michigan is called ICSID. So what is ICSID? First of all, it's a word that we completely made up. 3 years ago, we hired one of the creators of the Pure Michigan campaign, a hugely successful campaign for all of Michigan, to help us figure out how to address awareness for arts and culture. Because we'll never succeed with advocacy, we'll never succeed with sustainability if we don't get people using these institutions more and more aware of the fact that they exist and their impact on the community. So ICSID, he recommended that we should create a brand for arts and culture in all of southeastern Michigan. And the brand has to have someplace it drives people to, so we have a website that we just launched 3 weeks ago called ICSID.com. And the reason for the name ICSID is that we didn't want a brand whose name was art something, because it doesn't say history and science, and there's a lot of people that think I'm not artsy. We didn't want something that said culture, because a lot of people think that's foodie and ethnic, and that leaves out a lot. We didn't want to say Detroit, because we cover 7 counties, and in our region, some people think Detroit is the coolest place, and other people don't come here and go to other parts of the region. And we didn't want to say southeastern Michigan, because that's just sort of governmental and mushy. So ICSID, we chose for 2 reasons. We looked at about 100 different names. We liked the I's because they don't only look kind of like people, but they also stand for inspiration, ideas, imagination, the very thing that arts and culture is all about. And the other thing we liked is the name ICSID is sticky. You remember it. So ICSID is for all arts and culture that's open to the public in our region. And this is what it looks like. This is a picture of the homepage. Every time you refresh the homepage, you get a different frame around it. We've sent our photographers out to organizations all over the region. This is from the Arab American National Museum, I believe. We have editorial coverage. You see 2 spots for stories on this. And I'll talk about the audience buttons in a minute. So here's how ICSID works, not unlike a lot of arts portals. We have over 100 organizations that have their programs currently listed, and this is just starting. They do all kinds of programs, workshops, tours, exhibitions, performances. We list them on ICSID. We have event listings, we have images, we have editorial stories that not only are on our website, but we're also going to be sharing them with media. And then we have 2 e-newsletters. Every week we send out ICSID Experiences, which is what to do in the next week to 10 days. And once a month we send out ICSID Kids, which is what to do with your family, because busy parents do have to plan ahead. And the three target audiences that we're focused on, which is what our member organizations said we wanted to reach, are families, which is a huge audience for our sector, young creatives, adults with other adults in their 20s, 30s, early 40s, and what we call cultural enthusiasts, people like me, 45 and up, with other adults. And that's a particularly strong audience for theater and jazz and classical music and art fairs, but a lot of other things as well. But the whole purpose of ICSID is that we're driving audiences back to these organizations, and we're going to increase their participation. With that, we'll bring them more earned revenue through ticket sales or gift shop sales or whatever kinds of things that people buy with them. That will also increase their contributions because no one's going to give to an organization that they've never heard of. And it will increase volunteerism because that's when people get engaged in something that they feel passionate about and know about. So we have collected benchmarking information on all of these, and every year we will be measuring, are we moving the needle on those four characteristics. So how does this promote diversity and inclusion? We have three goals with this, and we're working across the whole sector so that each organization, as we've heard, and we'll hear more examples, people have marvelous ways of addressing diversity and inclusion with their individual organizations, but how can we as a sector work collectively and have collective impact? So we want to motivate audiences to attend diverse programming everywhere. We also want to reach out specifically to audiences of color to get them to come to things that they otherwise might not feel comfortable at or might not even think of going to. We also want to build marketing capacity in organizations of color. Like all organizations, we all need to get better and stronger at what we do. So for the public, it organizes the events by experiences rather than discipline or topic. So these audience buttons, one of them is just find something to do for the kids as if you're a family. Loud and fun is what you click on if you want to tweet, text, talk to your friends, and buy a beer. Free, everybody likes free. Quiet and reflective would be for those kinds of thoughtful things like poetry readings and exhibitions and chamber music. Completely random is our opportunity to highlight programs we just think are really cool that people ought to see and know about. For a date, doesn't matter if you're 20s or 50s, it's a great experience for two people. On stage, of course, and then Detroit and Ann Arbor because we have large concentrations of arts in both of those places. So we also do share information with stories. This is an example of a current story on the Sphinx competition tomorrow. Inclusion is built in what we cover and how we cover it. And partnerships with ethnic media, we're starting to set those up now that we've launched ICSID, and with community ambassadors to get people to share ICSID with their groups and friends and family so that that will grow our usership. And then finally, ICSID is built to be mobile friendly, so you don't have to have a computer. Anybody with a smartphone can use it. One of the things that's been really rewarding as we've been rolling it out, people have said, this is really great, this is wonderful, and I'll use it. And so for arts organizations, we create a level playing field. ICSID is free. You don't pay for these listings. You don't even have to be a 501c3 because we know a lot of arts and culture in our community is produced by churches and recreation centers or even artists that have just organized a project independently. We do, however, give all of our member organizations profile pages, and if you click any one of these or many of the others, it goes to a full page that details their organization, gives you a map, tells you a little bit about them, and links, of course, to their website. The editorial calendar helps the whole sector to plan ahead so that we can be planning marketing with enough time to actually do it effectively. And we have special promotions. Right now we've got one on music journalism. We have anniversaries that will be coming up. Midtown Detroit is a geographic organization. There'll be holidays. So all of those are ways to take diverse programming of many organizations and put them together so that we can get audiences that might go looking for one thing and find something they didn't expect. And then training in marketing and social media. We've been doing that for the last 2 years for our member organizations on everything from institutional marketing to how to write for the web. And finally, we'll be collecting market feedback. Where do the clicks go on ICSID? What are people responding to? We'll teach all of us as a sector to get better at how we connect with our audiences. So for audiences, ICSID is the experience engine. And for arts and culture organizations, it's about connecting the dots. Thank you.